Welcome to This Week in Christian History, a podcast from the Center for Christian History at Mississippi College. The Center for Christian History is dedicated to expanding knowledge and understanding of Christian history. Our mission is to provide a scholarly, unbiased look at the events, figures, and movements that have shaped Christianity over the centuries. You can visit centerforchristianhistory.com for daily historical highlights. And each week on this podcast, we'll do a deep dive into key moments with Christian history's leading authorities. Our first historical highlight for the week is the publishing of the first daily newspaper in New York City called The American Minerva on December 9th, 1793. The newspaper was published by Noah Webster before the dictionary bearing his name became a household staple. A Christian educator and believer in the Bible, Webster is quoted as saying, quote, "All the miseries and evils which men suffer from vice, crime, ambition, injustice, oppression, slavery, and war proceed from their despising or neglecting the precepts contained in the Bible." End quote. Our next historical highlight is the writing of the lyrics to Silent Night, often regarded as the most famous Christmas hymn ever written. Joseph Moore penned the words on December 11th, 1792 in Austria. Moore endured a very difficult childhood. He was his mother's third illegitimate child, and he wasn't accepted into any schools because of the shame that the circumstances of his birth placed upon him. However, Moore was a gifted singer, and the local priests heard him and allowed him to serve in the church. Our final historical highlight for the week is Peter Martyr Vermigli, an Italian theologian. During the Protestant Reformation, the power of the Catholic Church was absolute in Italy, and Vermigli often thought and wrote contrary to the Church's decrees. His work is often overlooked, but it contributed greatly to the overall sentiment of the Reformation. Vermigli fled to England so that he could write and worship freely, but eventually, Bloody Mary assumed the throne, and Vermigli had to flee to Switzerland. He died in Zurich on December 12th, 1562. Today in our deep dive, Nick Walters, founder and director of the Center for Christian History, discusses Christ myths, or myths related to Christmas. You can watch the full video presentation with helpful slides and graphics by clicking the View Full Interviews button on the podcast page of centerforchristianhistory.com.
So our focus today is really twofold. Two things we're going to follow over. Who were the Magi and who were they not? And then also, when might be the birth of Christ? So let me just say this as an opening statement, as kind of the way that things are rolling. Typically, this is something that I teach in my ongoing Sunday school classes. And so we've used part of the history and some of the background to tell part of a Sunday school lesson. And that fits fine enough. For our purposes for the Center for Christian History, though, we are not teaching a Sunday school lesson. We are teaching about Christian history. So I've had to kind of back in from a different way, even though we use Scripture as part of our reference, as we always will, during and using that as when can be and need be for the Center for Christian History. So bear with me if I go off into Sunday school mode more than history mode, but hopefully that won't make too much of a difference. But two things in particular we want to focus on because it relates to what's going on with Christian history are that just exactly who were the Magi, who they were not, more than likely, and when might be the birth of the church, the birth of Jesus Christ. So for those of you who may not be joining us later in our life, know that this is brought to you by the Center for Christian History, which is headquartered at Mississippi College in Clinton, Mississippi. Our website is there, centerforchristianhistory.com. You can learn more about us there. In particular, Christian History Today, which is something that you will be able to see every day of the week, another little tidbit or something that actually happened on this particular day in Christian history. It's there on our website. We have a Facebook page. We have Instagram as well. You can follow along if you are interested to know just a little bit, not the whole 9 yards, but just a little bit about what happened today in Christian history. We also have, as part of what you're watching now, is a monthly no-cost online sessions that we give from different subject matter experts on different aspects of Christian history. So follow along and get our newsletter or anything else like that to know when we are having these events live, and you're welcome to join them live as long as I don't mess it up like I'm doing right now for some of you who might be trying to click on via Zoom. But there's no cost to you, and all of these are going back to our YouTube page, so you'd be able to follow that as well. We have in-person events that we are doing to teach different aspects of Christian history, so you can watch about part of those. And we have a podcast and radio spots that, depending on the time that you're actually watching this, if you're watching this as we're recording it in December of 2024, in the first quarter of 2025, we will be starting the podcast and different radio spots built around Christian history today. So much for advertising. So what's wrong with this picture? Well, first off and foremost, understand that the things that I'm going to delve off into today as it relates to who were the Magi and were they there at the birth of Christ and Jesus's birthday, you are getting part of what is heavily relied on my opinion. Hopefully that's a fairly educated opinion and not something that it was just pulled out randomly. But understand there are other people who are full of well-known scholarship that would disagree, and that's okay, particularly when we don't know exactly. People have differing opinions, and just be aware of that, and that's all right. If somebody says, man, you sure did a lot of calisthenics to get to that idea and to get that idea about where you came up with that, that's okay. But part of it is what is wrong with this picture. We have a joke around my household that anytime we put out the nativity scene around Christmas time, I always take the three Magi, or the three kings, the three wise men, as they are called in different places and parts, and I always move them to the other side of the mantle or on the other side on another table in another place to represent that they were 2 years out from the time of being at the nativity scene. I do not believe that the Magi were at Bethlehem at the time of Jesus's birth. That goes back into a Sunday school lesson, and it goes back to other ideas about how well you might be able to trust the Bible and understand what it says. But you are getting my 2 cents on part of that about why they weren't there. So, but we do want to start with Scripture to give us an idea to tell us more about these Magi. So I am reading from the ESV, from the English Standard Version. You might have a different translation that you would be reading from Scripture. But let's start off by at least going to Matthew chapter 2 and in verses 1 through 6 as our first part of discussing and looking at the Magi. Remember that the book of Matthew is written to the Jews of that time frame by Matthew, who certainly had his Jewish creds as being a tax collector. And so there's a whole lot of, hey, remember this was prophesied, and now I'm telling my fellow Jews this is what took place in Matthew. And so that you get that peppered throughout this. But we start off with this in chapter 2, verse 1. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, okay, that gets to the time of our second part of this, of exactly when was Jesus born. So there's a little clue. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, who is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, that's important, I think, and have come to worship him. And when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. And they told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet. And that's what we see a lot, right? In Matthew is where he says things, so it is written, and others say, so it is written, so that his Jewish audience would understand this is in what would have been the Tanakh, or the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament, as modern day folks look at it. And you, O Bethlehem, picking up in verse 6, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people. All right, so let's jump into some of that so that we understand kind of what we're talking about. What are the Magi? What are they exactly? Wise men, Magi. Well, the term in the Greek that you actually would pull from that verse is the word megos, all right? And the word magician comes from this same term, these same words. It's only used 5 times in the entirety of the New Testament, twice in Acts. When it's used, it is specifically there to describe magicians. And these were magicians that the apostles and the missionaries would have run into as the church was being developed. So that is this word magos or megos. Okay, I will by very quickly reference tell you that I am not a Greek scholar, and so sometimes we get a little South Mississippi verbiage and pronunciation in some of these Greek words. So just be aware of that for all the Greek scholars that may be watching this and getting a little giggle. All right. But in the Old Testament book of Daniel, there are references to Magi as well, to these magicians. Their magician status, particularly those from the Old Testament, those that are there from the Babylonian captivity time, were likely instituted and created as their own version of magicians by Daniel. Daniel 4 and Daniel 5 very specifically say that while he was in Babylonian captivity, after his time of being in the burning furnace with his 3 compadres, and before the time he gets into the lion's den, by his interpretation of dreams from Nebuchadnezzar, as well as his Nebuchadnezzar's son Belshazzar, that, excuse me, that Daniel was the chief magician. And so during his time of being chief magician, there is a very strong school of thought, one that I believe happens to be true, that Daniel instituted this whole network of people who after him would become these magicians, these magi, these wise people who maybe or maybe did not have the ability to interpret dreams as well as Daniel did, but they certainly could pontificate things, and they could get an idea of what was to come. One of the ways they were able to decide what things were to come and what was going on was by watching the stars. There's a whole series of conversations and learning that anyone could go through about constellations from a Hebrew perspective, but that's another story for another day. So one of the things that the Magi recognize, as you can see in verse 2 there from Matthew 2, is they recognize that he was born King of the Jews. So when they showed up, they were understanding, and the way I expect that this all rolled out, and again, this is in my perspective, but they understood that prophecy and those other prophecies that were given to them from not only those things that Daniel would have given them during that time, but also other prophecies that would have taken place coming from Jerusalem and prophets after the Babylonian captivity. So these Magi would have been not only kept up with things that were going on in Hebrew prophecy, but they would have kept up with other prophecies that were made in other cultures and other languages and other religions throughout the world of what we would call the greater part of Asia, the Middle East, other spots like that they would have had access to and that they would have heard of and they would have seen from. So to know then that there was a prophecy saying that he was born the King of the Jews. They're already watching the stars. These folks did not only astrology, but also astronomy. And so they would understand what different times, things that were going on by watching the stars. And they note that Matthew tells us this, that they saw his star, not just a star. So when they saw whatever this anomaly was in the sky, it was fitting within the time frame that they understood, hey, there is something here different that they had not seen before. They knew the sky and the constellations and the stars and what they could see and what they could not see, as well as probably any other group anywhere on the surface of the earth at the time. That doesn't mean that somebody who was in another empire in another place in South Africa or in South America or in Northern Europe doesn't mean that they had a lock on all the constellations, but these guys were absolutely watching constellations all the time because it helped them to do their magician, air quote, magician work of being able to pontificate and understand what might be coming down the pike. So the other thing that's important to note when we look at this in verse 2, and this goes to the idea of about why the Magi were not there at the time of the birth and who they were. Notice of what is actually said in verse 2 about part of this was that in the Greek where they say, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? Next verse, for we saw his star when it rose. Now, the Greek modifier, the part of the language that from the term we saw there in the Greek, all right, it is modifying when it rose. It is not modifying his star. Modifying means, right, supporting, modifying, expanding on, focusing on. So when they say, we saw his star when it rose, the modifier is not on his star. It's on we rose, which means it's modified by saying, we were in the east when we saw it rising. We were somewhere else. You could say that for sure, right? Based off of the way of the structure that the Greek is there, that we were somewhere else when we saw it rising. We know that they came from the east, right? And so since we know that that is the way from whence they came, that's another piece of a clue that helps to get an idea to say they were not there whenever Jesus's star rose. When they went to Jesus and when they gave him those three gifts of myrrh, frankincense, and gold, it says that's part of the tradition of why we think there were three Magi. Scripture certainly doesn't tell us how many there were. It doesn't say there was a magician, right? So it's plural. So it was at least two of them. But who knows how many were a part of the crew? Who knows how many people came and showed up? It doesn't say specifically about that.
This Week in Christian History is produced for the Center for Christian History by Blue and Gold Media at Mississippi College, in cooperation with the MC Department of Communication. For episode transcripts and more information, visit centerforchristianhistory.com. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and follow the Center for Christian History on Facebook and Instagram. Our next podcast episode is coming next week. Thank you for listening.